We are at round 10 of the FIDE Women's Candidates 2026, and the race for the candidates' title is heating up. Vishali Rameshbabu leads the field with 6 points, half a point clear of Anna Musachuk and Jaina Zhu, while a pack of 3 players sits at 5 points just behind them. Every game from here on is critical. Today, we look at the decisive contest of this round, a game that promises drama, a complex middle game, and a wild in-game battle. Let us get into it. Divya Deshmukh, the energetic Indian prodigy rated 2497, has been one of the tournament's most fighting players. Aleksandra Goryachkina, the former Women's World Championship challenger rated 2534, is known for her deep preparation and clinical technique. Both players needed points desperately, sitting on 5 and 0 respectively, in a field where every half-point matters enormously. The Rai Lopez, one of the oldest and most respected openings in chess, begins with a pin on the knight defending the e5 pawn. The closed variation with d3 and the Pilnik setup is a solid positional approach favored by players who prefer slow maneuvering over sharp theoretical battles. Magnus Carlsen and Fabiano Caruana have both employed this system at the highest level, and it typically leads to rich strategic play with plans on both wings. White opens with the king's pawn, staking a claim in the center and opening lines for the bishop and queen. This is the most ambitious first move, fighting for central dominance from the very start. Black responds symmetrically, meeting the central challenge directly. This is the classical response, contesting the center immediately and leading to the rich double king's pawn structures that have defined chess for centuries. White develops the knight to f3, attacking the e5 pawn and beginning to establish a kingside presence. This natural developing move puts immediate pressure on Black's position. Black defends the e5 pawn with the knight, developing a piece to its most natural square. This is the universal response, bringing a piece into play while maintaining the central tension. And here comes the signature move of the Rai Lopez. The bishop pins the knight on c6 against the king. This subtle move does not directly attack e5, but creates long-term pressure by threatening to eliminate the knight that defends that pawn. Black challenges the bishop immediately with the Morphy defense, the most popular reply in the Rai Lopez. This forces White to declare intentions with the bishop right away. White retreats the bishop to i4, maintaining the pin while keeping the tension alive. Capturing on c6 would give Black a doubled pawn, but also open the b-file and grant Black the bishop pair. Black develops the second knight to f6, counterattacking the e4 pawn and bringing another piece into the game. This is the most principled and popular continuation, fighting for the initiative. White castles kingside, tucking the king to safety and connecting the rooks. This is the closed Rai Lopez approach, preferring king safety and long-term pressure over immediate central action. Black develops the bishop to e7, preparing to castle and consolidate the kingside. This solid move is the backbone of the closed Rai Lopez setup for Black. White chooses the Pilnik variation with d3, a slower but very solid approach, rather than the sharp d4 push. White reinforces the center and prepares a gradual build-up on both wings. Black advances on the queen side, gaining space and threatening to trap the bishop on i4. This typical Rai Lopez break starts Black's queenside counterplay. White retreats the bishop to b3, a well-placed square where it eyes the f7 pawn and stays out of danger. The bishop on b3 is a classic Rai Lopez piece, often very powerful in the long run. Black solidifies the center with d6, fully committing to the closed structure. This sets up the typical closed Rai Lopez formation where both sides will maneuver for a long time. White plays c3, preparing the eventual d4 break to challenge Black's central pawns. This is a key strategic idea in the closed Rai Lopez, building a broad pawn center step by step. Black castles kingside, completing development and connecting the rooks. Both sides now have their kings safe, and the battle of maneuvers can truly begin. White places the rook on e1, supporting the e4 pawn and preparing for central action. This is a standard Rai Lopez move, keeping the rook active on the e-file. Black reroutes the knight toward the bishop on b3, aiming to either trade it off or force it to a less active square. This is a classic plan in the closed Rai Lopez, targeting White's important bishop. White tucks the bishop back to c2, keeping it on the I2G8 diagonal. The bishop is now pointing toward Black's kingside, staying connected to the long-term attack. Black expands in the center and on the queen side with c5, staking more space and preparing to challenge White's central ambitions. This is a very natural follow-up after placing the knight on i5. White plays h3, preventing any bishop intrusion on g4 and preparing to expand on the kingside. This prophylactic move is very common in these slow Ruy Lopez positions. Black mirrors with h6, also preventing any knight jump to g5 by white. Both players are carefully preparing their positions before committing to action. White finally launches the central break with d4, striking at the heart of black's pawn chain. This is the thematic Ruy Lopez central advance, attempting to create immediate tension. Black captures immediately, releasing the central tension on their own terms. Taking with the c-pawn opens the c-file and keeps black's queenside structure intact. White recaptures with the c-pawn, restoring the central pawn and keeping the position solid. The d4 pawn now becomes a strong central presence. Black develops the queen to c7, a very flexible square connecting the rooks and preparing to exert pressure on the c-file. The engine notes a slight shift here, indicating the position is becoming more double-edged. White develops the remaining knight to d2. Heading toward f1 and then g3 or e3 to support the center. This is a typical regrouping maneuver in these positions. Black activates the bishop, connecting the rooks and preparing to use the c-file with the rooks. The position is becoming rich with both sides maneuvering their pieces toward active posts. White's knight continues its journey toward a more active square via f1. This knight will likely head to g3 or e3, reinforcing white's central and kingside control. Black brings the knight back to c6, centralizing it and adding pressure to the d4 pawn. This repositioning improves the coordination of black's pieces significantly. White advances the pawn to d5, closing the center and trying to gain space. However, this move walks straight into difficulty. The engine swings nearly a full pawn in black's favor, as closing the center actually gives black a free hand to operate on the queenside while white's pieces have less scope. Black immediately exploits the advance by jumping the knight to b4, threatening the bishop on c2. This outpost on b4 is powerful, and the knight cannot easily be driven away. White retreats the bishop all the way to b1, a somewhat passive square, simply to keep it safe. This loss of tempo is a consequence of the committal d5 advance. Black advances the a-pawn, further gaining queenside space and preparing to expand with i4 in the future. The queenside initiative belongs firmly to black. White develops the bishop to e3, activating it and connecting the rooks. This also eyes the b6 square and attempts to coordinate white's pieces more effectively. Black doubles the rook pressure on the c-file, a very natural and strong move. The c-file is semi-open, and black is poised to generate real pressure down it. White connects the rooks and keeps the queen active, stepping away from the pressure on the c-file. The position remains tense with both sides maneuvering carefully. Black reroutes the knight from b4 to i6, heading towards c5 where it will be a powerful outpost. This is a patient regrouping to find an even better square. White repositions the bishop to d3, aiming at the h7 pawn and adding kingside pressure. The evaluation dips slightly for white here as the bishop could have been better placed. The knight lands on c5, the ideal outpost it was aiming for. From c5, the knight is beautifully centralized, cannot easily be challenged, and puts pressure on white's bishop on d3. White brings the rook to c1, contesting the c-file. This is a logical response, trying to neutralize black's rook pressure on that open file. Black repositions the queen to b8, a flexible square that keeps options open for the queenside and allows the rooks to work together on the c-file. The position is roughly balanced, but black's pieces are very harmoniously placed. White's knight finally reaches g3. Solid central post where it supports the e4 pawn and eyes f5. White is trying to build kingside activity to balance black's queenside pressure. Black trades the knight for the bishop on d3, eliminating one of white's well-placed pieces. This exchange simplifies the position slightly while maintaining black's structural advantages. White recaptures with the queen, keeping it active. The queen on d3 remains well-placed, participating in both sides of the board. Black reroutes the queen to b7, a very purposeful square putting pressure on the e4 pawn from a distance. The coordination of black's pieces is excellent. White repositions the queen to d2, keeping it flexible and maintaining coordination with the rooks. The position remains dynamically balanced. Black tucks the king to h7. A small but useful move to get the king slightly off the back rank. This prevents any back rank threats and keeps everything solid. White exchanges one pair of rooks on c8, simplifying the position. Trading rooks can sometimes help the side with less space, but the position remains complex. Black recaptures with the queen, keeping the queen very active. The remaining rook on i8 still controls the I-file and black's position remains solid. White immediately places the rook on c1, maintaining pressure on the c-file. Both sides continue to contest this important open file. Black retreats the queen to b7, resuming pressure on the e4 pawn and keeping the queen active on the long diagonal. Black's position is very solid and coordinated. White's knight retreats to e1, beginning a journey toward d3 or f3 for better centralization. This regrouping shows white is searching for active counterplay. Black repositions the bishop to d8, a surprising but clever move. From d8, the bishop eyes the b6 square and prepares to become more active. White strikes on the king side with f4, trying to create dynamic play and challenge black's solid setup. This is an ambitious move. Opening lines and seeking activity. Black accepts the pawn exchange, opening the e-file. Capturing here is natural, releasing tension and allowing black's rook potential activity. White recaptures with the bishop, activating it on the f4b8 diagonal. The bishop is now well placed and adds pressure to black's position. Black delivers a check with the bishop, forcing the white king to move. Notice how this check is also a powerful repositioning, placing the bishop on an active diagonal where it targets f2 and will coordinate with the queen. The engine sees black gaining nearly a full pawn with this move. White steps the king to h1. The only reasonable response to the check. However, this is where the game turns dramatically in black's favor. The engine swings significantly here, as white had better defensive resources available. Moving to h1 passively allows black to build up pressure without interruption. Black centralizes the rook to e8, bringing it into the game with great force. The rook now eyes the e4 pawn and threatens to become very active down the e-file. White captures the d6 pawn, winning material and trying to create counterplay. This exchange gives white a pawn but may open lines that benefit black's active pieces. In response, black captures the e4 pawn with the knight, immediately winning it back. The knight on e4 is very powerful, centralizing dramatically and putting pressure on white's position. White takes back the knight on e4, trading off the powerful piece. The material is roughly balanced, but black's activity remains high. Black captures the knight with the rook, and now the rook is extremely active on the fourth rank. White's position is under real pressure from the coordinated rook, bishop, and queen. White plays the queen to d3, trying to bring it to a more active defensive post. The queen helps guard key squares while keeping options for counterplay. Black advances the f-pawn, gaining more space on the king side and restricting white's pieces. This move keeps the pressure building gradually. White develops the knight back to f3, bringing it to a more active square and keeping the position defended. The position is starting to simplify, but black retains a small edge. Black repositions the queen to i8, an unusual but clever square that connects it with the rook's potential on the I-file and keeps the position flexible. White moves the bishop to c7, trying to activate it and create some pressure on the queen side. The position is entering a complex endgame phase. Black places the rook on c4, a very active central square. The rook on c4 attacks the first rank potential and ties down white's pieces to defensive duties. White trades rooks on c4, simplifying into an endgame. Trading into a simplified position is logical when defending a slightly worse position. Black recaptures with the b-pawn, creating a passed c-pawn. This passed pawn on c4 immediately becomes a long-term asset that white must deal with. White captures the c4 pawn with the queen, eliminating the passed pawn but allowing further simplification. The queens are now being exchanged shortly. Black takes the bishop on c7, and the pieces continue to simplify off the board. The endgame is approaching and black's bishop pair could become a factor. White recaptures with the queen, keeping queens on the board for now. The position features queens and minor pieces in what promises to be a technical endgame. Black captures the d5 pawn, picking up material and equalizing the pawn count. With two bishops against knight and bishop, the endgame dynamics are interesting. White advances the b-pawn, trying to create some queenside play. This move starts a plan to push pawns and create counterplay in the endgame. Black repositions the bishop to c6, a more active diagonal where it can support the queenside pawns and influence the center. Black's two bishops are beginning to coordinate nicely. White moves the king to h2, activating it for the endgame. King activity is crucial in any simplified endgame, and white correctly begins to centralize. Black centralizes the queen to e4, an aggressive and active square that puts pressure on white's knight and pawns simultaneously. White plays the queen to d6, trying to create threats against black's king and maintain queen activity. Both sides are maneuvering in a complex queen and minor piece ending. Black repositions the bishop to b7, aiming at the g2 pawn and keeping the bishops active. The two bishops are working together to create pressure from multiple angles. White brings the queen to e5, a central square where it contests black's queen and maintains activity. The position is delicately balanced as both queens eye each other. Black advances the bishop to d5, a powerful centralized square where it hits multiple targets and is ready to participate in any in-game transition. White trades queens by taking on e4. Moving into a pure in-game makes sense for white, hoping that the knight can hold against black's two bishops. Black recaptures with the bishop, and we now have a pure minor piece and pawn in-game. Two bishops versus a knight and bishop is a classic imbalance that often favors the two bishops in open positions. White centralizes the knight to d2, heading toward better squares. The knight needs to be active to compensate for being outgunned by black's bishop pair. Black repositions the bishop back to d5, maintaining the powerful centralized bishop. The d5 square is a strong outpost for the bishop in this in-game. White advances the a-pawn, preparing to push the queenside pawns and create a pass pawn. This queenside expansion is white's main counterplay idea. Black activates the king, moving it toward the center. King activity is crucial in games and black's king heads to a more influential position. White pushes the b-pawn forward, trying to create a pass pawn on the queen side. This is the counterplay. White needs to generate winning chances, or at least drawing chances. Black advances the a-pawn in response, fixing white's i3 pawn and slowing down the queenside advance. This creates a pawn race scenario on the queenside. White pushes the b-pawn to b5, creating a passed pawn and racing it toward promotion. The b5 pawn is now a real threat that black must deal with. Black brings the king closer to the center and toward the queenside, preparing to deal with the passed pawn. King activity near the passed pawn is essential. White pushes the b-pawn to b6, creating a dangerous passed pawn that is only 2 squares from promotion. The evaluation dips slightly for white, however, suggesting this advance may be slightly premature. Black centralizes the king to e6, the most active square from where it can support queenside operations while keeping kingside options open. White brings the knight to c4, supporting the b6 pawn and activating the knight. The knight on c4 is well placed, supporting the passer and controlling key squares. Black moves the king to d7, approaching the dangerous b6 pawn. The evaluation suggests black is taking the right approach, using the king actively to deal with the passed pawn. White checks with the knight, forcing black's king to move. This is an attempt to disrupt black's king march toward the passed pawn. Black steps to d6, keeping the king close to the passed pawn. The evaluation suggests black continues to hold a slight edge as the king approaches the b6 pawn. White retreats the knight to d3, repositioning. The knight is looking for a way to support the passed pawn or create alternative threats. Black advances the g-pawn, creating kingside counterplay. This is an important move, creating a pawn advance that will tie down white's resources on multiple fronts. White moves the king to g3, activating it toward the center. The king needs to help deal with black's advancing pawns. Black repositions the bishop to e4, a very active square where it dominates the center and restricts white's knight. The bishop pair is starting to assert itself. White retreats the knight to b2, heading toward c4 again, or perhaps toward a different active square. The knight is struggling to find a dominant post. Black's bishop shifts to c2, keeping pressure on white's pawns and further restricting the knight's movements. The bishops are controlling key diagonals. White checks with the knight on c4, forcing the black king to move again. This check is a way to buy time and disrupt black's coordination. Black steps to c6. The king now directly confronting the b6 pawn and the knight. The king is very active in this endgame. White advances the king to f2, trying to help deal with black's kingside pawns. The king needs to be active to cope with the threats on both wings. Black pushes the f-pawn to f4, advancing the kingside pawns further. Now black has a dangerous pair of connected passed pawns beginning to form on the kingside. White plays g3, trying to create a blockade against the advancing f-pawn. This pawn move is an attempt to stop the f-pawn's advance. Black captures on g3 with check, and now the f-pawn has been transformed into a passed g-pawn. This is a key moment in the endgame as black generates a dangerous passed pawn. White recaptures with the king, but the engine shows this endgame is becoming very difficult for white. The evaluation shifts nearly a full pawn as black now has a coordinated bishop pair and active king working together powerfully. Black plays the bishop to b3, an excellent move that attacks the knight on c4 and also threatens to capture the i3 pawn. The engine notes a significant swing here, as Black's coordination has become overwhelming. White retreats the knight to b2, and this is a serious mistake. The engine evaluates this as a blunder, losing more than 2 pawns worth of advantage. The knight retreats passively when White needed to find a more active defensive try to cope with Black's overwhelming activity. Black advances the h-pawn, and this move is marked as a mistake by the engine as well, though in the context of a winning position. Black's advantage remains enormous regardless, but a more precise continuation would have been even stronger. The engine sees Black as winning by nearly 3 pawns. White steps the king to f3, trying to get it more active and approach the dangerous passed pawns. The position is very difficult for White, but the fight continues. Black captures the b6 pawn, and this is flagged as a mistake, though Black remains winning with a 3.5 pawn advantage. Capturing the pawn is tempting, but there may have been even stronger continuations available. Black's advantage is so large that the game's outcome is no longer in doubt. White centralizes the king aggressively to e4, trying to create threats and delay Black's winning process as long as possible. Black checks with the bishop, forcing the white king to move. This check is also marked as a slight inaccuracy, but with nearly 4 pawns of advantage, Black is simply converting a winning endgame. White steps to d4, keeping the king active and trying to create some resistance. Black moves the king to c7, and this is flagged as an inaccuracy too, though Black's advantage remains enormous. The king heads toward the center to support the advancing pawns. White pushes the king to d5, trying to get it as active as possible in the losing position. Black advances the g-pawn to g4, creating a powerful passed pawn that races toward promotion. The engine evaluation here is around -5 pawns, showing the position is completely winning for Black. White moves the king to d4, but this is the final major mistake, allowing Black's pawns to become unstoppable. The engine shows the evaluation crashing to over 7 pawns in Black's favor as the g and h pawns become a decisive force. With the knight unable to hold back both connected passed pawns and the bishop pair still active, White resigns. The game was ultimately decided by the endgame, where Goryachkina's 2 active bishops completely outplayed the lone knight. The critical turning point came when White's knight retreated to b2 passively, allowing the bishop pair and advanced pawns to become unstoppable. Black's connected passed pawns on the g and h files, supported by the bishop pair and active king, proved too much to handle. Fascinating in-game battle in round 10, with Goryachkina converting a complex minor piece ending to move to 6 points and join the race for the top. With Vishali still leading and 3 rounds to go, this tournament is far from over. What did you think of this in-game technique? Let us know in the comments below, and make sure to subscribe so you do not miss round.